Hey guys, how's it going? ItZMuRdA here with part 2, or the gameplay commentary, tips, and mechanics section of my How to Not Suck at CQC or SMG Infiltrator video. This is my attempt at making that one video that you really need to watch if you're trying to up your game as a close quarters or SMG Infiltrator in PlanetSide 2. The idea was inspired by Malorn's suggestion to me on Twitter to make a video of this type, and I've been thumbing through footage for hours and really days now trying to find real examples of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Note that in any of the footage in the background you'll see a lot of things on display ranging from aiming and dodging well to picking the right targets, flanking techniques, using cover, cloaking and uncloaking at optimal times, when you should engage enemies and when you should evade and reset the fight in your favor, medkit and sensor dart usage, and I mean really much more than just that. But I plan on giving you guys general advice as well on anything and everything that I think is important to know, and I'll also try to show some specific clips that serve as good examples with direct commentary later in the video. I've done a handful of other videos, as you guys might know, on things like settings and keybinds, loadouts, and stuff like that, so I'll refer you to those for a more in-depth analysis. But no matter what class you play, I still recommend finding a sensitivity, DPI, and keybinds that you're comfortable with, and then practicing with those both in actual fights on live servers and in VR training as well. It really goes without saying that practice makes perfect here, as with most things in life, so I recommend spending some time practicing, both quickly acquiring different targets and then moving on when you're comfortable with that. Start weaving in dodging and movement techniques, work on acquiring different targets while strafing back and forth, you know, 80, 80, 80. And then furthermore, you can add to that tapping your crouch button during your strafe to weave that in. Lastly but not least, make sure important keybinds such as your cloak activation or your ability activation, your melee or your knife key, your reload, your grenades, switching to your pistol or your sidearm, things like that are readily available to you without sacrificing your ability to aim or dodge while pressing those buttons. As far as loadouts go, we're strictly talking CQC or SMG Infiltrator here, so in part 1 of this video I'll be going over everything there possibly is to know about Infil SMG loadouts. I cover all 3 empires, all of the SMGs, all of the attachments, both that I recommend and that are somewhat situational, as well as sidearms, ability and suit slots, grenades, utility items, and stuff like that. Pretty much everything in that loadout screen. You guys should also keep in mind that an Infil update will be coming out in the next few months, and it might change some things, but in the previews we've seen thus far, they kind of suggest that much of the stuff that we're talking about right now will stay the same for this particular playstyle, and Infils seem to be getting more of like a recon and sniping type of perks and buffs, if you will, rather than added CQC utility. If you haven't already, I recommend you either first go back and look at part 1 of this video for all of the relevant loadout info, or at least definitely make sure to check it out after this. You can click on the on-screen links in the annotations, or just check it out from the link in the description below as well. Now, as far as gameplay goes, the first thing I want to talk about and show you guys in action is medkits. I literally live by these things and I eat them like candy. As I'm sure you know if you watch the stream regularly, they're one of my favorite things in the entire game, and we all know how effective they are at giving you a full reset of your HP between fights. But now what is less known is how useful they can be in combat as well, whether it's a quick duck for cover to recharge, or even literally being used while you're taking damage, just for the purpose of buying you enough time, typically for your enemy to run out of ammo and force him to reload, while then you can switch back to your SMG or sidearm and finish him off. Now you'll see a few examples of this from my stream footage over the past few days that's playing in the background right now. There are also some other quick tips that I want to mention while leaving some relevant video playing in the background for you guys. First, your sensor dart is your best friend. Well, alright, maybe it's your second best friend after medkits, but it is an incredibly useful tool, and it even allows you to see red dots on your minimap for cloaked enemy infiltrators. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but it is something you should use early and often, and of course not while in the heat of battle, but you should try to sort into it a good bit. You don't necessarily need the last rank, or maybe even the second to last rank you can wait off on for a while, unless you have nothing else to buy, but you should try to have it running for nearly every encounter you get involved in. Use those audio cues, and use your map, obviously with your sensor dart out, to your advantage to instantly give yourself an edge over most of your opponents. Another thing worth mentioning, especially if you run the Commissioner, and now this is doable with the underboss as well, but depends on if you get a headshot and depends on the level of nanoweave and a few other factors like that. But you should take advantage of the quick assassination of shooting an enemy with your pistol and then immediately knifing them for a follow-up, as there's no delay if you knife second after the shot, and rather there's only a cooldown on firing after you knife. I don't know if that was a little complicated how I just explained that, but basically shoot first, knife second, but you can really do them at almost exactly the same time. Now, while it will kill some enemies that that are lacking nanoweave, if you can, try to go for a headshot with the pistol first, as it should guarantee that your assassin attempt will, just happen basically immediately. It feels almost like a one-shot, with the exception of anything wacky like a perfectly timed heavy assault shield from your enemy or something like that. You'll see some examples of this in the background as well. There's been some pretty decent streaks where you can just kind of go crazy with this, but it's best used as just quickly dispatch somebody without having to make your position all that well known and have to reload your SMG and things like that, because you don't want to waste a perfectly good opener when you can just quickly take somebody out and then go on to the next target with your SMG as you would have normally. Now, one of the other quick tips that I have is to take advantage of the fact that you can hack stuff. I don't often use wall turrets, but you definitely can hack enemies out of them, and you usually get a quick kill on somebody who's caught completely by surprise. You can also hack terminals, of course. You can pull an AMS Sunder as a spawn point. You can, of course, recharge your ammo, or you can even switch classes if you think that it'll be beneficial to you. This is about infiltrators, but there's been countless times where you can switch like to a max especially, or even switch to a heavy or a light assault, something with C4 to take out a max or a vehicle that might be bothering you, and then get back to your infiltrator before that terminal goes and reverts to the other empire. Now, getting into the actual gameplay and the actual mechanics of your battles, there's a few more key elements to keep in mind. First, don't always assume that you need to be cloaked. You should assess your surroundings and learn when you really need it, and when you can get by without being harmed as if you were any other class in the game. This has become increasingly important with the introduction of the nano armor cloak as a viable alternative to hunter cloaking, of course, and there's precious time to really be saved from simply not cloaking when you're not in immediate danger. Similarly, Hunter Cloak gives you some more leeway and freedom in this regard, and when maxed out it's really good for regen, but you still never want to be caught without your cloak available when you actually need it to be, just because you foolishly used it all up approaching the fight when nobody was even in line of sight to shoot at you anyway. Another extremely important thing to take note of is using flanking and the angles of the cover and line of sight in a particular base to your advantage. This sounds pretty straightforward and obvious when you're playing a stealthy class that is weak in direct confrontation, but I think a lot of people could benefit from actually thinking before just running in without a plan. For instance, this is one that happens all the time. If there are a few guys running in a line, you obviously, I would think it would be obvious at least, want to shoot the guy in the back first, as most of the time the ones ahead of him won't even notice that he died. But if you obviously shot somebody in front of him, you'd bet that the person behind would just be looking in that direction anyway and would notice you and probably shoot you in the back. Now, on the contrary, opening up on a steady stream of guys running from an AMS is probably never really a good idea unless you have some sort of cover that can block your line of sight to the AMS. I see this happening a lot too, where there's a ton of targets just trickling in and you want to kill all of them, but you really can't safely do so because there's always going to be one guy behind the next guy, and maybe you take out one or two of them but you die right away anyway. So typically you would want to follow them until the surroundings work in your favor and not theirs. You can pretty much ignore what you've heard about kill the medic first most of the time, I think at least, whenever you're presented with multiple targets. You should instead quickly assess their threat to you and then use the advantage of having the element of surprise on them to take out whatever you perceive to be your highest threat target first. Sometimes it'll be the medic, but oftentimes I don't think it will be, as he has the reaction time, of just being a human being, plus the time it takes for him to switch to a weapon, assuming he has his med applicator out, which they usually do, especially if they don't think that they're in immediate danger. Now, keep in mind that you won't always make the right choice from whatever your gut instinct is. I don't think anybody's perfect in that regard, or in any regard maybe. But anyway, occasionally you need to react quickly and you have to think on your feet when the guy who you thought wasn't a threat ends up quickly spotting you, and then he opens up on you, and the guy who you were planning on shooting is just not paying attention to anything. So speaking about people who don't pay attention or who are oblivious, it sounds stupid, but I often assume that the enemy doesn't really use their minimap or listen to their audio cues very well, especially in large battles, as time and time again evidence proves that they really don't. This goes back to my reason for typically not using the suppressor that I talked about in more detail in the part 1 of the loadout video. But it won't always work in your favor against intelligent opponents, of course, yet 9 times out of 10 the guy you're killing definitely didn't hear or see you kill the guy right next to him if he's preoccupied with the rest of your empire approaching or shooting from a different direction. So that said, this is kind of a decision you have to make on the fly, but sometimes it's worth getting right into the thick of it, and it actually helps you out more than picking people off from the outside, as you've probably seen in the clip in the beginning of my flare gun video, and really in countless other videos or streams, not only mine but others as well, where there's like 5 to 10 guys all huddled up around some sort of corner or some sort of column, and nobody really seems to notice the one guy that's knifing everybody in the back while they're all concerned with wherever the main push in the front line is. I'm sure you maybe have seen the giraffe videos from back in the day shortly after release, but I mean, even without being a giraffe, it really goes to show that a lot of people don't really pay attention when they have something else that has already grabbed their attention. So sometimes it's better to just get right in there and pretend you're one of them to take guys out, but that's a decision you have to make, like I said, kind of on the fly. As I mentioned at the start, dancing or general movement techniques are extremely important. The question that I probably get the most pertains to how I manage to escape and then reopen on my enemies with the cards in my favor, while so many other people are easily spotted or die as soon as they uncloak to kill their first target. And it's really a hard one to explain, and it comes mostly with practice, but I'd say it begins with dancing, as we like to call it. Now, in the most basic sense, it requires a good combination of strafe and crouch moves while fighting an opponent in order to increase your chance of surviving the battle to begin with by dodging more of their shots. Twiff is extremely good at this if you've seen our duels or watched his stream or had the honor of fighting alongside him or against him on the Connery server. He alone has inspired me to work on mine more and more each day, and there's also, on top of that, an additional component that allows you to get away from the scene of your own crime, if you will, and then reappear with the element of surprise in your favor once again. Now, this goes into the reason why I really love the Infiltrator and even the light assault classes so much, because of their quickness, their agility, and their mobility. I even inserted a light assault shotgun tower fight clip here, which I hesitated to do, but your feelings on shotguns and light assault aside, look at how many different times I utilize my mobility and my medkits, you can't forget about those, to my advantage to continually outsmart the opponents, almost as if I was doing some David Copperfield magician type of stuff where I could just disappear and then reappear on the other side of my targets. Now, light assault aside, you want to take those same principles and apply them to your Infiltrator, starting with simple things like don't keep taking the same route or approach. If you're spawning at an AMS or your enemy's spawning at an AMS and you're defending a point where you guys are going back and forth constantly, you don't want to keep going the same way. You don't want to always go left. You don't want to always go in between these two rocks or something like that. You don't want to be too predictable, basically. But you also don't want to take your sweet old time because you think that you'll be less likely to be seen if you're slow. PlanetSide 2 and Infiltrators in PlanetSide 2 differ from PlanetSide 1 in that you could be crouched or standing still and you'd be less likely to be seen in PlanetSide 1, but that is not the case how it works right now in PlanetSide 2. So I think you really want to play on your opponent's reaction time and kind of always need to be counting on that in your favor instead. You should take paths that involve many quick turns and cover. For instance, there's an example of my most favored path when exiting a tower that's being camped to all hell. You'll basically see that playing in the background here as I just did a mock run of it to show you guys because I couldn't find one just off the top of my head with all of the many hundreds of hours of footage that I had. But anyway, you'll see here I spawn, I run up to the gravity pad directly in front of me on the right, and then I cloak on the way up so as to not just be noticed being visible and uncloaked as soon as I hit the top floor by anybody who might be camping through the shields up top. And then I immediately do a 180-degree turn and I run out of the door that was directly above the spawn tube. Then once I'm outside, I wrap around one of the upper barriers and I hit the upper grav pad on the way down just to ensure that you don't really take any fall damage and maybe to juke anybody that might have caught a glimmer of you when you were running around. Now, if you do all of this at sprinting speed, you're usually only exposed for really a split second or two, and that's while cloaked. At any given angle that the enemy might have on you. And unless they got lucky with an explosive shell from a vehicle far away, which are usually predictable because they, you know, there's a timer on how fast like a tank shell or something like that or a Dalton can fire. So if you go out, if you see somebody camping with something like that, you can try to wait a second and then time it. As soon as that shell hits, you then move, and they usually won't be able to refire fast enough. But that aside, you usually can make it safely behind all of the guys that are camping the mid-level spawn doors below. And this even really works great as a light assault with C4, and I do that plenty as well. But of course, you're more likely to be seen if you're playing light assault, yet you can definitely still pull it off with much reliability. So anyway, that very specific example aside, you'll want to get used to using movement techniques as a close quarters infiltrator in both your openers and your closers, as I like to call them. Before you even engage targets, you're often presented with many angles of approach. Now this isn't something I suggest sitting there and planning out for more than a second or two, but you'll become better and better at it with time, and it will just become second nature eventually. Now oftentimes you know where your enemies are because of your sensor dart or other icons on your minimap or your HUD, or even audio cues. You heard somebody stealth, or you heard a jetpack or something like that. And a common example that I absolutely love that happens all the time is the small rooms that have two doors on opposite sides, say an A point in a tower, or even the shield generator rooms at amp stations and things like that, where you usually know from one of the many indicators that an enemy or multiple enemies are inside, and you can often abuse that privilege by opening up on one side of them and then quickly coming around the back while the guys inside are still waiting for you to come through the door that you opened on. And many people play this game very conservatively, but the generally quick time to kill also rewards aggression quite well. After all, you want to turn every fight into one where it favors you instead of your enemy. So for instance, do people in a room like this have anti-infantry mines set up on one of the doors? You can then shoot the anti-infantry mine with your sidearm. It only takes one shot if you're using a Commissioner to detonate it, from an angle where you can't really be seen. And then without hesitation, before you even see the enemies react, you recloak and run around to the opposite side. And now almost every single time, the enemies inside the room will either check the door that you detonated the mine at, or at least divert their attention to that direction while you're already behind them on the other side, shooting them all in the back. Now if there isn't a mine, you can kind of make the same thing still happen by tossing in a grenade, or maybe even opening fire on somebody directly from that side. You could either shoot them a few times if you think it's too dangerous to be overexposed, or if they take additional cover, you can then run around, or you can even kill one target, and if you know that there's more targets inside, then you loop around the opposite door and take care of the rest from the back. This honestly works like a charm time and time again. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of it happening on my stream and others as well. It's probably even happened to you, whether you've been on one side of it or the other, but definitely try to use these types of situations to your advantage when you know that you can make people think you're coming one direction and then go around the other. It even works with pillars. There's plenty of times where I'll look like I'm going to go one way, and then once I'm out of line of sight of the enemy, immediately go back the other way, and it usually works very, very well. Now for your closer, so to speak, this is where the explanation gets a little bit tricky. Once I've finished a fight or I scored a kill and I need to reset the battle in my favor, which is something you'll need to learn to do subconsciously even, as infils are not going to continuously go head to head with multiple enemies at once, I try to be very unnatural and unorthodox. It mainly means moving in unpredictable fashions. For instance, if I just killed an enemy and there isn't another immediate threat already shooting at me that I have the ammo to finish off, I will instantly reload and then stealth. And you should note that you want to reload a split second before you stealth, just like you want to fire your pistol a split second before you knife. In this case, so as to avoid getting the bug where sometimes you automatically uncloak if you happen to take an action like reloading immediately after cloaking. And as soon as I begin that reload and cloak, almost as if I had a vanish button or a smoke bomb or something like that where a cloud of smoke appeared that I just slipped away into, I use the surrounding area to find the path of both least resistance and greatest cover, and typically I try to change the direction that I was moving in while unstealthed. So any enemies that spotted me take out my last victim will typically assume that I'll continue running in the direction that they saw me going last while I was visible to them. But a quick jump and either a 90 or 180 degree turn immediately after you stealth, and especially in the direction of a near building or a wall or barricade, box, tree, anything really that can be used for additional cover, is something I advise greatly and I try to do often. It's really hard to explain exactly since the method will be the same, but the execution will vary greatly from situation to situation depending on your surroundings and the environment. As you're doing all of this, you want to make sure that immediately after your primary weapon is reloaded, you also then reload your sidearm and your sensor dart if need be, unless of course you know that you're going to be confronted sooner than you have the time to reload all three of them. By then you often have been in stealth long enough for your shield to be ready to recharge before attacking your next opponent as well, even without advanced shield capacitor. So if you are safe to uncloak for a few moments, either then or while in cover or on the way to your next kill, be sure to do so in order to be back at full shield before you engage your next target. Likewise, use a medkit whenever you do this if you didn't use it already while escaping to ensure your getaway in the first place. Well, that's pretty much it, guys. There's a ton of stuff, literally a ton of stuff I tried to squeeze into this video, and I tried to annotate it pretty well, but I'm sure I missed some things along the way. So either way, please leave your feedback and any questions or comments or even suggestions if you play Infil a lot as well yourself. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. I really hope it helped you out. This was possibly the biggest undertaking that I've done for a video project, as it was so many different pieces of footage that I wanted to gather together and a ton of things that I wanted to talk about. So I apologize if I talk quickly at times, but I just wanted to get you guys as much info as I could without making the video too ridiculously long, though I think we're pretty much approaching that point right now anyway. So that being said, please do check out part 1 of the video if you haven't already on loadouts, and you can either use the on-screen annotation links or scroll down and take the links down in the description below. And as always, I really appreciate the feedback and the support, and don't forget to check out the PlanetSide 2 stream every day at ItZMuRdA.com or twitch.tv/ItZMuRdA_TV, and you can also check me out on various social media outlets such as Twitter and now even Facebook and Instagram, apparently, with the same handle as here on YouTube at @ItZMuRdAX. So I really appreciate any follows and subscribes and things like that, and once again, thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you around in the future. Have a good weekend and play some PlanetSide 2 for me, guys. Take care.